They said he was the one fighting for justice, but by the end of that courtroom session, he was the one being judged. And then, the moment no one expected, Prince Harry collapsed. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That's not an exaggeration. It's not a headline crafted for tabloid drama. It's what happened in front of the press, in front of the court, in front of the world, and maybe even, if we're being honest, in front of history. But let's pause. In everyone's self-deprived prophet says any minerals may, could, or can't. Because before we go racing toward that courtroom floor and what led to his fall, I want you to sit with this contradiction. How did a man who once stood on the steps of Westminster Abbey in full royal dress uniform end up kneeling before a judge as his own credibility was questioned, torn apart and redefined? How did Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, son of King Charles III, brother to the future King of England, become the central figure in a legal firestorm that now raises serious allegations of fraud, manipulation, and deception? And why, at the height of this trial, did the silence in courtroom 1 feel so heavy, so much like a funeral, not of a person, but of a reputation? Let's begin. The return to London was quiet, but that silence was hiding a storm. Monday morning, gray skies over the Royal Courts of Justice. A cold breeze pushing against camera lenses already fogged from the tension in the air. No fanfare, no wave to the crowd. No Meghan. No press conference, just Prince Harry. Black suit, blue tie, eyes down. Not the same man who once shouted into microphones about the evils of the media. Not the same man who stood firm on Netflix, on Oprah, on his memoir, shouting his truth to the world. This was a different Prince Harry, one who had returned to the UK not as a royal figure or a media warrior, but as a litigant. More than that, as a man who, unbeknownst to many until hours later, was walking into a courtroom already under suspicion. The plan, or so it seemed, was simple: finalize the last of his lawsuits against the UK's tabloid newspapers, get the privacy he claimed was stolen, get a verdict that made him whole. But this time, the narrative wasn't linear. This time, questions were being asked about him. What was the real motive behind this trial? Now, most people assumed this was about phone hacking, a practice once rampant in British tabloids. Private texts. Voicemails, the most invasive kind of theft. Prince Harry, years ago, had joined a chorus of victims demanding justice. He alleged that the press had violated his boundaries, his relationships, his peace of mind. And maybe he was right about that. But in court this time, the conversation twisted. It wasn't just about what had been done to him. It was about what his team had done in pursuit of revenge. Emails, contracts, strategy memos. The defense didn't come to this trial empty-handed. They brought documentation, testimonies, a timeline that painted a radically different story. And that story hinted at something no one in the media, or the monarchy, was prepared to confront: a legal battle about privacy. With Prince Harry accused of leaking secrets himself? Let that sink in. The man who sued the media for digging too deep was now being accused of planting stories, manipulating coverage, orchestrating leaks behind the scenes, while attacking others for doing the same. There's a word for that kind of contradiction: hypocrisy. But in a courtroom, there's a harsher word: perjury. The collapse didn't start with his body. It started with the truth. As journalists, we're taught to look for patterns: body language, speech slips, chronology, contradictions. And from the very first hour of this trial, there were signals. Harry's legal team appeared confident, well-dressed, measured. But insiders described tension, not just from the opposing counsel, but from within. According to one court insider, A member of his team was seen visibly shaken after the second recess. That was when a previously undisclosed cache of emails was admitted into evidence. Suddenly, the case wasn't just about Harry versus the press. It was about Harry versus the truth. And the truth? It had timestamps. I damaged departments to be a counsel, signatures, forwarded chains, some of which suggested that the prince, or those working directly for him, were not always honest with the court. Now ask yourself, how does a royal figure, with millions watching, navigate a moment like that? Do they deny, deflect, or do they collapse? The courtroom was packed, but you could hear a pin drop. People imagine courtroom drama the way it's portrayed in film, shouting, gasps, dramatic, reveals. But reality is quieter, sharper. When the verdict began to form, not from a single declaration, but from a progression of judicial observations, something shifted in the air. Those present described the sound of Harry's breath catching, the shuffle of his notes on the table, the way he leaned toward his attorney with a subtle, nervous movement, and then, after a particularly brutal statement from the bench, he slumped. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't exaggerated, but it was noticeable. His security leaned in. His lawyer paused. The judge looked over. Within seconds, medical staff entered the room. A prince collapsed in the country of his birth, in the institution that once protected him. This was never just about privacy. Here's the part most people miss. This wasn't only about headlines, about newspapers, voicemails, or paparazzi. It was about what happens when power is used selectively, when someone weaponizes victimhood, when someone says, "I deserve justice," while possibly bending the truth to fit their version of it. And in that courtroom, those ideas didn't stay abstract. They became evidence, allegations, exhibits, things that could be counted, dated, cross-examined, things that didn't match the narrative Harry had spent years building. The collapse made headlines. But the verdict is what will haunt him. Because here's what they're not telling you on the front pages. The court didn't just question Harry's claims, it questioned his credibility. And for someone who has built an empire of storytelling, Netflix, books, interviews, podcasts, that credibility is the currency. Once it's gone, what's left? Why? Now. Why does this matter? Because something happened in that courtroom that changed how the world sees this man. Because this isn't just about one person. It's about all of us watching. Watching how power is challenged and sometimes abused in plain sight. It's about the messy, inconvenient truth hiding inside every PR-polished narrative. And it's about how the institutions we once trusted, the monarchy, the media, even the legal system, are now turning inward. This isn't the end of the story. This is the moment the mask cracked. But the real face of this case? That hasn't fully emerged yet. And that's why you need to see what happens next. Because right after the verdict was read, right after the collapse, a document was passed to the judge. It wasn't on the official docket. It wasn't from Prince Harry's team. But it changed everything. It contained a name, a new allegation, a deeper conspiracy that suggests this case was just the beginning. And what it revealed? Well, we'll get to that. But first, you need to understand how this all started to unravel. Because the downfall of a prince doesn't happen in one day, it starts long before the cameras arrive, long before the judge speaks, long before the body hits the courtroom floor. And the real story is just beginning. What does it sound like when a city holds its breath? You might think that's too poetic a question to ask about London, a city of traffic, taxis, tourists, and trains that never stop rumbling beneath the surface. But on that morning, outside the Royal Courts of Justice, something in the air shifted. Not just the temperature, or the slow creep of mist over the Thames, but something else. Something tighter. More invisible. More intentional. As if the city itself knew that whatever was about to unfold inside those walls wasn't just another royal headline. It was something heavier, more final, more personal. Because this wasn't just about law, it was about legacy. And when Prince Harry returned to the UK, he did so without ceremony. No flag, no procession, no press statement, just the sound of his shoes on the pavement, and silence. But not the peaceful kind. This was the silence before something breaks. You only notice who's missing when the stakes are highest. Let's start with the obvious. Meghan wasn't there. She wasn't on his arm. She wasn't in the gallery. She wasn't even in the country. And for a couple that had, for years, presented themselves as a unified front, as a we, a team, a shared voice against injustice, that absence was loud.
Louder than the cameras clicking.
Louder than the reporters whispering behind notepads. Louder than the judge's gavel when the session finally began. And no, we're not speculating about their marriage. That's a different story. Maybe a quieter one. Maybe not. But her absence here? It wasn't just personal. It was strategic. Because whatever was about to unfold, someone decided she shouldn't be physically linked to it. And whether that decision came from her team or his, either way, it meant something. That's where we start. The walk that wasn't meant to be watched. The footage only lasts about 17 seconds. Prince Harry steps out of a black vehicle. Not a Range Rover this time, but something less recognizable. No royal crest, no entourage of palace aides. Just 2 private security men flanking him. Both unmarked, both stone-faced. Harry's suit is dark.
His tie, a muted blue.
He doesn't look up. Not once. Not at the cameras. Not at the few people gathered behind the barriers. Not even at the reporter who, very softly, calls out his name. Not shouting, not jeering, but simply asking, "Are you confident today, sir?" No response, just the scrape of his shoes as he passes the gate and disappears inside. And that's the last time he's seen outside for hours. Because inside, things were already unraveling. When you're the plaintiff, you get to speak first, but sometimes that's a trap. At 9:15 a.m., the session begins. Formally, it's a continuation of Sussex versus Associated Newspapers, one of the final cases stemming from Harry's long-standing claims that UK tabloids used unlawful means, like phone hacking, private investigators, and impersonation, to collect stories about him. But the defense had come to play chess, not checkers, and from the opening moments it was clear something had shifted. Instead of spending time defending their own practices, the lawyers representing Associated Newspapers turned the narrative around. They didn't just deny wrongdoing. They suggested Harry's team had knowingly manipulated parts of their case. Documents were referenced. Email chains introduced. Witnesses hinted at, all with one consistent implication: that Prince Harry, the supposed victim, had blurred the lines between truth and narrative, and may have crossed a legal one. And just like that, the courtroom started to bend, not toward justice, but toward something murkier. Inside the gallery, you could feel the breathing change. Courtrooms are strange places. They're both sacred and clinical, cold marble and hot emotion. And when Prince Harry took his seat, you could almost hear the inhale. Observers describe a strange stillness in the gallery. Not boredom, not even suspense, but that kind of dread you feel when the math isn't adding up, and you know the answer might not be what you expected. He sat 3 rows back from the bench, next to 2 attorneys. Behind him, a legal assistant scrolling through notes on an iPad, Occasionally, someone would whisper something in his ear. He nodded, but never smiled. And across the room, the tabloid's attorneys watched him, not with smugness, with calculation. Because if what they were about to allege held up, then this wasn't a privacy case anymore. It was something far more damaging. A reputational autopsy. What they revealed next changed the tone entirely. Around 11:37 a.m., about 2 hours into proceedings, the defense asked permission to introduce what they called Supplementary Material Item C. No one outside the room had heard of this document before. It hadn't been included in the original pre-trial.